21. A special meeting of the Salem-Keizer School District is called to order. This meeting is a work session. Note, the plan is to conclude this work session by 7:30 p.m. Now, I'm going to go around and take attendance. I'll call your name. Please acknowledge. Vice Chair Bethel.
Here.
Director Blasi.
Here.
Director Hein.
Here.
Director Leopold.
Here.
Director Kylo.
Here.
Director Goss.
Here.
Advisor Mebinton.
Here.
Thank you. Now I'm going to read the land acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is critical in building the necessary trust to coexist in harmony with one another. Indigenous tribes and bands have been apparent on the lands of the Willamette Valley across Oregon and throughout the Americas since time immemorial. In this valley, the ancestry of the Kalapuya reaches the furthest back in time, reminding us that this plentiful place has been called home by its original inhabitants long before the names of the snowy peaks and bountiful waters were re-identified. Today, we acknowledge that the people of this land still exist and inhabit this valley, not as heirs to it or artifacts, but as reciprocal contributors to the modern society we live in. We forward our respect to the first peoples of this land, the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, and those who have ceded lands here. We reflect on the displacement, removal, and genocide of the indigenous people that occurred throughout Oregon and beyond. In so doing, we truly honor the gravity of the past and endeavor to see that people may live in harmony and equity on this land for posterity. May this acknowledgement carry resonance as a tool of peace over the land and waters we mutually rely upon. Please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Now please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. There are no agenda modifications today. And now I'm going to request Superintendent Perry to please take over with some 3 key topics for today's work session. Superintendent Perry.
All right, so I just want to go quickly over the agenda for tonight. We're going to start with a presentation around our social emotional learning data from Chris Moore, who's one of our school psychologists. And he has been a leader in the district around our social emotional learning initiatives for a number of years. We'll count those later, Chris, but and then we're going to go into the just a quick update on the Reimagining School Discipline and Safety Summit progress we're making so that you're continually in the update of that. And then finally, we're going to end the night with some Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance. Our goal is to be out of here by 7:30. And for people who are anxious to hear anything about the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance, tomorrow morning, we'll take that piece out and post it on its own from the, so it has its own video and people don't have to go through the whole board meeting with that. And I just also want to tell you that we're coming off of a 2.5-hour meeting with an update around the new guidance that was dropped today. We got our embargoed version of it about 1 o'clock might have even been 12:30. So still lots to digest and process with that, but we'll keep you as updated as we can related to that. With that, Ethan, if you just want to pull up the slides for a minute, and then we'll let, after that, after a couple slides, we'll let Chris take over from there. I do want to orient you to our strategic plan. And as a reminder, this is part of what guides our work. In the center of that is always equitable student outcomes. And one of the things we've talked about off and on is what about those social emotional learning, and how does that fit within our key performance indicators within our strategic plan. So this is just, again, a quick little view of the strategic plan. As you move into the next slide, one of the things we promised you is that we'd look at some academic measures each year. And Craig, can you take it on this slide?
Of course. Thank you, Superintendent Perry. So we've identified 3 primary academic measures related to each grade level. So we have some measures around elementary success, middle school success, and high school success. And Dr. Udosanata and I will be presenting this data to you as kind of a progress monitoring data midpoint for the year. We'll be talking about that in a February board meeting. The other measures that we have, which are, can I just move on with the Superintendent Perry? The other measures we have, which are kind of a holistic measure. And one thing we heard the board express that they wanted was a way to be able to kind of holistically measure how are we doing as an organization, and how are kids doing holistically. Academic is a key part of that, of course, but there are other parts that contribute to that as well. So we'll be presenting data to you about how we are moving forward with community engagement with the ultimate goal of community empowerment. Our equity, diversity, and inclusion work, we'll be presenting information about an equity audit that we are conducting, and we'll be presenting that, I believe it's in April. And then tonight you're gonna hear about social emotional supports from school psychologist Chris Moore. We'll be talking about that. So the next one just shows some, we can go on to the next slide.
I apologize, it's
okay. It's all right. So here's just kind of an overview of where you can expect us to present some data sources. And so in December, we showed you the KPIs and we oriented you to the dashboard, which I hope you've all had success being able to enter and start to be able to see some of our data sources. And just a quick note on the dashboards that we shared, there's data that's constantly being added to that dashboard. So it's not a static one-time look. It's an active dashboard, particularly related to attendance and engagement and things like that, which are taken every single day. So the dashboard is updated regularly. Today, we'll be focusing on social emotional supports. In February, academics, and then we'll talk about our equity audit, engagement, and then we'll give an end of the year review, kind of a glance back on how were we related to our KPIs.
And as a reminder, we're trying to move away from kind of post-mortem assessments that we report to you out a year later to keep us in that formative space. You've heard testimony off and on about can you do more than just assess around SBAC? There's more to kids than that. And it happens so late and you are reported on it so late, it's really hard to judge health of the system. So this is our attempt at that. At some point, we would really love it if we think deeply about the results policy as it relates to this, but this gives us a way to kind of move that conversation forward and give you some more updated data. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Moore. He is going to, in some ways, start at the beginning so you really know, here's what the Panorama data survey does, here's when we do it, some of that beginning information before he shares some initial results. And then we have many more results that he's not going to share that are in a PDF format that we can get to you after the board meeting. So with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being here tonight and for your heart and commitment to the social emotional health of our kids.
Absolutely. Thank you, Superintendent Perry and Dr. Sproles, Dr. Adosnata, Chair Chandragiri, Vice Chair Bethel, Director, Salem-Keizer Leadership. I'm so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to share with you some of the exciting and heartbreaking work that we've been focusing on over the last few years to really give us a sense of what students are telling us, what staff are telling us, and what our families and our community are telling us, so that we can be in a place where we give stories and narrative to those numbers and make sure that we're paying attention to the heart of this work that we're doing. This work is particularly meaningful to me. My junior year of high school, almost 30 years ago, I was the junior school board representative. So it's so exciting to hear that Lynette is joining the Salem-Keizer school board as an advisor. You know, I gotta say, you know, back in McMinnville High School, with a rayon shirt in front of the school board, my junior year, I got to share some information. And that information I shared was directly related to some of the mental health struggles in my own family with depression and anxiety. It had to do with a friend of mine who attempted to take her life. And at a spring board meeting, I shared with the board, I said, you know, we screen for vision and we screen for hearing and we ask questions about academic skills, but we don't ask about social emotional well-being about those skills. And why do we wait until something tragic happens until we pay attention to that and help build capacity ahead of time? And I got nods and smiles and appreciation for that opportunity to share that, but nothing changed at that time, and I understand that. But a lot has changed since that meeting almost 30 years ago. We've seen increases in anxiety and depression and suicide. But something else has changed. More and more people are paying closer attention to social emotional well-being, not just those areas where we struggle, but in those areas that help us thrive. We know that we have the capacity to grow and build these skills over time, but that it takes intentional effort. So my first invitation to you tonight is to take a quick look at this screen at these personal qualities that haven't traditionally been measured by tests, but that now that we have measurable research-backed instruments to take a look at it. You see resourcefulness, sense of wonder, resilience, grit, curiosity, courage, self-discipline, empathy, compassion. So my invitation to you in this next 5 seconds is to take a look at that list and see which one of those particular social emotional competencies or personal traits you're most proud of in yourself. The one that you go back to on a day-to-day basis to help make sense of the world, to cope with the difficulties, but also to access some of the joys and connections that really make life come alive and give us the opportunity to be more inclusive to everyone in our community. So what are our goals for today? Well, first it would be to imagine what it might be like if each of the traits that you just imagined that you're most proud of in yourself, that every single one of our students could identify those traits, that they had the right support and the right instruction at the right time to help develop those over time. And so tonight I want to help us understand a little bit more about the basics of social emotional learning and how our partnership with Panorama Education has helped us elevate student, family, and staff voice. We want to identify some trends connected to our key performance indicators, specifically sense of belonging, but also a topic that's closely related to sense of belonging, teacher-student relationships. And then finally, I want to highlight a few bright spots and promising practices that have been happening in the district over the past few years and share a couple stories before we wrap up. So what is social emotional learning? Any of us right now could probably think of one person in our life who could benefit from having better self-management, better self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, or responsible decision-making. The first person I think of is myself. I could improve in these areas. That's the key, is when we see ourselves as the most important content and curriculum for our kids in terms of social emotional well-being and the skills and competencies that kids and staff and families need to thrive, then we have an opportunity to truly join together and create a culture of care that nurtures what kids, staff, and families need most. Anchoring that work explicitly in our strategic plan, which I appreciate that Superintendent Perry pointed out at the beginning, and our brave leadership to articulate these particular outcomes as being important. It means something when it's explicit. It means something when it's out in front. And it means something when we're driving towards a specific goal together. And seeing social emotional skills in the middle of that strategic plan is something that my junior and high school self would be thrilled to see. So we needed to take a look at how we were going to actually measure some of these areas. And because, you know, what's measured gets treasured is kind of a saying that oftentimes gets thrown out there. And so we had to find a way to do that. So we partnered with Panorama Education, who currently partners with over 1,500 school districts, 17,000 schools, serving 10 million students in 49 states and 15 countries around the world. Focus specifically on research-backed topics that help us understand what students, families, and staff need. We were the leaders in Oregon, starting with our first partnership with Panorama nearly 4 years ago. Portland Public Schools followed closely after that, as did Gresham Barlow. Now, Panorama Education and the work we've done with it was not just about a social emotional learning screener to get baseline understanding of well-being for our students and families and staff. It's also about asking questions related to well-being and family and community engagement, equity and inclusion, and most recently, distance learning. What's that timeline look like? Well, something really significant happened in the district nearly 4 years ago when the Office of Student Equity, Access, and Advancement and the Office of Behavioral Learning was founded. An opportunity to be more intentional around that work and elevate it across the district. That's also the same year we proposed partnership with Panorama. And so in the fall of 2018, all of Panorama actually was surprised when we were able to share that 98.5% of our schools in the very first year opted in to share their voice, to give students a chance to share how they're doing, what they thought about school, and what they might need for us in terms of support. Fall of 2019, last fall, seems like forever ago, we asked all students, grades 3 through 12, all schools participated, and we also had an opportunity to have our first family school relationship survey and pilot the teacher perception of student SEL feedback. Last spring, we were getting excited to do our first fall and spring snapshot of sense of belonging, school safety, growth mindset, grit, emotional regulation, but of course the world turned upside down. But we didn't let that stop us. We pivoted within 3 weeks, partnered with Panorama Education to get some baseline measures around distance learning and what was working, what wasn't working, some basic needs for families, for students, for staff, and also just basic well-being. And then we asked many of those same questions again, along with an expanded version of our work around sense of belonging and equity this fall. We have we have mountains of data, of qualitative data, but what we have inside that data are thousands of stories. Tonight, we're just going to talk briefly about our key performance indicators, specifically sense of belonging and teacher-student relationships. You'll also notice that it's not just about students and student voice, and that's what differentiates this work and puts us ahead and well-positioned to begin truly focusing even more so on equity and the whole child, along with social emotional learning. And that means asking staff and families similar questions to understand where might there be gaps in understanding, gaps in need, so that we can be responsive rather than be reactive. Now, I want to give you a quick primer so you can kind of orient yourself to see what these percentages really mean. So best practices in survey design focus on what's called percent favorable. So you set a cut point of the types of responses you'd hope to hear. For example, how excited are you about going to this class? Or maybe that question might be, how excited are you to come to this meeting tonight? So we would say something to the effect of, we would like students to be quite excited or very excited to come to this meeting, or the adults to come be very excited or quite excited to come to this meeting, or a student to go to that class. And that total of 45% plus 36% gets us to 81% favorable. What's that look like in the context of some of the questions we've asked around sense of belonging? For example, how connected do you feel to the adults at your school? Now that may give you pause. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But 26%, or 1 out of 4 kids, feels quite connected or extremely connected to the adults at their school. Now, that's hard information to hear. And it oftentimes feels like a gut punch when we think about the well-being of our students and our families and our community. And when we're able to tell the truth and hear feedback about what's happening, it gives us a lever and a place to stand to do something about it. So when you look at these percentages, higher equals better and lower is going to be a greater opportunity for growth. How about this question? How much do you matter to others at this school? 37% of students responding favorably here simply means 37% of students said that they matter quite a bit or matter a tremendous amount. Now you'll notice that highest category, of course, in the middle is matter somewhat. And this is really important data for us to think about, because the type of support you provide when students feel like they matter somewhat is different than the intensity and level of support you provide for a student who does not feel like they matter at all. And that's the essence of where the multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS work, comes in. How about this question? It's not just about adults and how we're supporting students, it's about how students treat each other. How much respect do students in your school show you? 47% said quite a bit or a tremendous amount. So that's kind of just a basic overview of what some of the questions look like and what those percentages mean. Percent favorable. Sense of belonging. Our first year, fall of 2018, at the elementary level, 61% of students responded favorably. We'll look at both that overall number and it disaggregated by race or separated out by race. You'll notice those two arrows pointing specifically at something, a noticing or a wondering, that 56% of our Black African American students and 59% of our white students don't feel a favorable sense of belonging. That's below average, and that's an invitation for us to ask more questions. How about at the secondary level? 39% of our students feel a favorable sense of belonging. Now let's pause for a moment and imagine what it might be like to be a student who doesn't feel a favorable sense of belonging. Most people understand that it's not okay to be marginalized and pushed to the edges. And what we found in this particular metric is the heart of what students have been telling us for a very long time, is that we can and must do better by them. You may notice those particular arrows. You'll see that our Native and Indigenous students, our multi-ethnic students, and our white students were below average in their sense of belonging. But we'll also notice there that our Pacific Islander students are significantly above average in terms of their sense of belonging. And that's where we start to ask questions, what might be different or what might be happening there? And we can start to correlate some of that work with the equity outreach coordinator work and community school outreach coordinators from the Office of Student Equity, Access, and Advancement. Now, what happened the following year, 2019? Elementary, we saw the sense of belonging increase by 4 points. That put us the 50th percentile compared nationally. And you'll see the questions over there to the right and how they line up and the improvements that we saw over time. How about at the secondary, or how about at the elementary sense of belonging for disaggregated by race? You'll see it's 65%. And what you'll see is across the board improvement. Now, this is really important for us to have that both and lens to look at this work, which is to say we both realized improvement across the board and should be encouraged by that and build on that. And we recognize that, for example, our Native and Indigenous students are still 2 points below average in terms of the sense of belonging at the elementary level. What's that mean for secondary? Well, in 2019, last fall, that stayed flat, which puts us at the 20th percentile nationally in terms of middle schools and high schools and student sense of belonging. Now, it's important to ask other questions like what are some areas where we actually did improve and how can we focus on those and drill down so we can choose some low burden, high impact strategies for making progress. What did that look like disaggregated by race, that 39%? Well, a bright spot we would see for our Native and Indigenous students is an improvement by 4 points. We would be concerned about our Hispanic, Latino, Latinx students decreasing their sense of belonging by 1 point and our multi-ethnic students by 2, and asking why did all other areas remain flat? Now, what about teacher-student relationships, for example? Now, those are the close proximity of, we talked about relationships for a number of years, but we really haven't had a metric to take a look at what that means. In fall of 2018, our teacher-student relationships at the elementary level, 69% of students responded favorably. We'll notice that our Black and African American students, our Hispanic, Latino, Latinx students, and our Pacific Islander students were on the lower end, while our multi-ethnic students and our white students were at the higher end. How about at the secondary level? 50% responded favorably, and you'll see differences there. Now, what happened in 2019? Well, at the elementary level, we have one of our biggest bright spots. We saw an 8% increase in favorable responses of teacher-student relationships at the elementary level. And if you look at the questions that make up that category, you see what that means. And that right there, particularly with a 91% response rate, is something to celebrate. And I think a true testament to how hard our educators and support staff and leaders work to try to care and connect and reach out to kids and families to do this critical work. What happens at as we disaggregate that data by race, we'll see improvements across the board. And again, the both and perspective is to celebrate progress in some areas and recognize that we still have a ways to go. But when we do this work together and we acknowledge the truth and importance of sense of belonging, it gives us an opportunity to write a different story moving forward, a narrative that is one of hope, that is one of inclusion, and that one is truly focused on equitable student outcomes. How about at the secondary level? What happened with teacher-student relationships? A celebration right there, an improvement of 2 points. And we may say, well, gosh, that's at the 20th percentile on a national benchmark, but we're Salem-Keizer. Let's focus on who we are, what our students need, what our teachers say, what our families are telling us. And what you'll see is there's still some areas to celebrate. I would point out particularly how many of your teachers are respectful towards you. 87% of students responded favorably there. That's something to celebrate. How about what did you disaggregate by race? We'll see those changes over time. We see for our Native and Indigenous students a significant increase in the quality of those relationships, or perceived quality of those relationships. And then we'll also note for our Pacific Islander students, again, what kind of interventions have been put in place that have helped us realize those significant gains. So, wow, Chris, you just dropped a puppy picture in there. And this is heavy information. And it's important for us to take a look away from the screen from time to time, to take a deep breath, to let the information sit there so we can come back in 20 seconds to focus on some of the bright spots, the contributions that your advocacy, that your support, that your leadership has made possible. This is the awkward part where the psychologist looks away to try to role model the behavior that he's hoping to see from the class or from the audience. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to take a deep breath there, look away from the screen. We've all been focusing a lot on the screen these days. So the key performance indicators, how have they showed up as bright spots or promising practices? Well, let's look at this one. One elementary school in particular broke down the question out of teacher-student relationships. If you walked into class upset, how concerned would your teacher be? 49% of students said their teacher would be quite concerned or extremely concerned for this school back in 2018. This team had a courageous conversation with each other and acknowledged that this is hard. And instead of running away from that information or trying to explain it away, they talked to each other about what their values are and how relationships matter. And even if their level of care is beyond what students perceive it is, it's important to make sure that students understand. And they made a plan. What was their plan, might you ask? Well, they simply decided that they would push out to recess the last few minutes and in the hallway and monitor as students come in and look for signs of distress so they could spot check and check in and connect with students. So what happened? A low burden, high impact intervention that 1 year to the next changed 21 points. Now that's significant. And what that does is it gives us as educators a sense of agency that there are things that we can do when we do them together on a consistent basis over time that make meaningful change in the lives of kids. That's a big deal. How about the sense of belonging at the secondary, some of the promising practices there? Well, our student advisory boards have been a critical component of that. And Superintendent Perry started that a few years ago. And what we've seen is that has grown. Student voice, student choice, really understanding what's happening in schools so that we can do better by students and work together on creating the culture and climate of care and equity that everyone deserves. I highlighted North Salem and Sprague in particular because their assistant principals, Carlos Ruiz at North Salem and Mark Harris at Sprague, reached out because their students wanted to talk about mental health and wellness and stress, particularly right now. And in those conversations with them, I showed them what sense of belonging data looked like, and I invited them to consider what things they might be able to do at their schools to enhance that sense of belonging. Now, these are surveys, yes, but really I like to talk about them as conversations because it's not possible to talk one-on-one necessarily with every single student, every single family, every single staff member, but we can get a broad understanding of things that we're looking at together. And then our invitation then is to ask more questions. And what several schools have done is they've done empathy interviews. In one school, Judson in particular, reached out to parents and asked permission to do video interviews with a few students to talk about sense of belonging and how they feel about relationships with school, and to be part of the process or have a level of self-efficacy and agency to suggest some things that might help them feel better about school, more connected, and then sharing that information with staff. That's a courageous step forward. How about overall some key performance indicators in SEL and school climate and some bright spots and promising practices? Now, of course, I'm focusing on those positive pieces, and our job, of course, is to acknowledge the suffering that's in front of us and the difficulties at the same time that we model what it means to continue moving forward in intentional ways. And this hasn't been perfect, this process, but we're not allowing the perfect to be the enemy of the good. We've tried to listen to where we've made some mistakes in our work with Panorama Education and asking these questions, and try to listen and model what it is that we're trying to embody in this practice by making those changes and listening to feedback and moving forward in more efficient and effective ways. So I think one of the biggest pieces, as Superintendent Perry and district leadership have focused on highlighting equity, social emotional learning, mental health, and looking at the specific offices related to that work signifies its importance. And the bright spot and encouragement that the addition of more personnel of equity outreach coordinators and community school outreach coordinators, and through the Office of Behavioral Learning, and merged with multi-tiered systems of support, and more school counselors and more school social workers and more classified support staff dedicated to social emotional learning. That these are things to celebrate, and this is the collection of advocacy, of effort, and of collective recognition that this is the work we need to do moving forward to lift every student up so that every student feels like they belong. We've talked about this journey of safe and welcoming schools that started 4 years ago and has evolved to this place to really pull things together in a more coherent way so we can understand where we're going together and the critical work that must be done moving forward. We look at multi-tiered systems of support, but really anchoring and asking ourselves those questions so we don't get so bogged down in the details, as we want to provide the right support at the right time for each student. Looking at school-based mental health, that you all have been focusing so importantly on this particular issue. And what it's resulted in is hard work that's developed school mental health partnerships with Marion County, Polk County, and Trillium. Is hundreds of staff trained in QPR for suicide prevention. And last spring, we added an additional school-based mental health partner with Stronger Oregon that now has added 19 additional schools with dedicated school mental health support. And by next fall, we hope to have all 65 schools with dedicated school mental health support. How about some professional supports and programs and practices? Now, there's a lot of things happening, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but I think it's important for you to know that district leadership and staff advocacy and association support and family engagement has led to us having dedicated time, 20 to 30 minutes daily at the elementary level for the last few years, focused specifically on community building and social emotional learning. The secondary level, for the first time, every single secondary school has advisory, and there's emphasis and encouragement around SEL. We've provided some additional content, advisory content and curriculum called Character Strong for SEL and character development. Several specialists have gone through restorative practices training as we look at that reimagining school discipline piece. Our associations have really supported the work around culturally responsive teaching in the brain and offered additional PD opportunities and support for these critical issues. We've had training each year around this data to invite teams to be able to look more deeply and ask questions about what students are saying, what staff are saying, and what families are saying, and give them the tools that they need to do the work. And I'm excited to share that at the end of March, we'll have the capacity to do quick spot well-being check-ins with students. Before, we had to wait 2 to 3 weeks before we got results back. We'll have the capacity at the end of March to be able to get results back from students on just spot checks with their well-being, on worry, on excitement, on hope, on anger, on frustration, within 5 to 10 minutes so that we can be responsive to their needs in real time. So what are those SEL and action stories? What does it look like when we talk about, is this a program? Is this a technique? Really what it comes down to is connection, care and connection, what we've been focused on with district leadership for the last 10 months. So an example would be a student in a class, 4th grade class. I've talked with many teachers and support staff and leaders over the last several months. And one teacher in particular was having a hard time, as many of us are right now. And after I listened for a while, I asked a question that I often ask, which is, have there been any moments that have just been little bright spots or small joys or pieces that you kind of hold dear to your heart? And she paused for a moment and she says, well, one student who rarely has their camera on came out at the end of class the other day and said, teacher, this is really hard for me, but I just want you to know that you're still the best part of my day. What might it be like if we gave each other the opportunity to be one of the best parts of each other's day? How about this student? We ask thousands of kids about their own resilience and what's important to them. And this student in particular focused on smizing. In the past 10 months, I have learned to really look at people and smize. What's a smize? Well, that's when you smile with your eyes, of course. For example, when I go to the grocery store and I'm aware that people cannot see me smiling at them through my mask, and sometimes it's just really hard to read who's angry, who's in a hurry, who's having just one of those days. So my mom and I like to play a game we call Smizing. So while we're waiting in line, we choose who we're going to smize very carefully. And after we've chosen, one of us casually tries to meet their stare. We make eye contact just long enough while we're smiling beneath our masks, so big that our eyes begin to smize. Eventually, our smize reaches their eyes, and 9 out of 10 times, the stranger is smizing back. During these tough times, it doesn't cost a thing to let someone know that you see them and that they matter. So next time you're in line at a grocery store in Salem, look around. This student and his mom may be smizing at you. What might it be like if that defined our day-to-day interactions moving forward, so that every student had a chance to feel like they matter and they belong? Thank you all so much for the opportunity to share this information and this pivotal work that district leadership has been such strong supporters of. And I'm happy to take any questions for a few minutes that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. I just wanted to kind of call different names and see if you have a question. I want to start with our board advisor, Mabinton. Do you have any question? Where is she? Oh, there you are. You want to unmute? Go ahead. Let's start with your question first.
I don't have any questions, but the progress seems really good. And I love the smizing. And I would agree highly with your data. Sounds very accurate. So yeah, but I see the progress and that's good. I'm glad that the district is supporting something like this. This is really good.
Thank you. And your feedback and your insight will be critical to continuing to do this work, elevating your voice and the voice of your classmates. And so I'm so excited for you to be a part of this leadership group moving forward.
Any other questions? I can't hear you. You have to unmute Director Hyan.
Yeah, I just had to find the button. Sorry. I mean, we all, I'm happy to see the increase, in a lot of those numbers. Of course, I really worry about the kids that are at the bottom. And, some it was 6 kids. And even though the number seems small, that's 6 human beings. And some were so much higher. And I don't know if I really have a question. It's just, I'm really concerned about those and how do we, is there something extra still we need to do besides just continuing on? Is there more things we need to add in order to reach those kids? Because I don't want to see anybody at that bottom level. I don't think that's good for anybody to be there.
Absolutely. And Director Hyan, I really appreciate you calling attention to, those are students who are most vulnerable. And that it's not okay for any student to not feel like they belong or feel like they matter. Whether that's their perception or it's reality, doesn't matter. Our job is to show up, to be present, and to do better by them. I think the power of the data here is that it helps us really truly understand how do we direct our limited resources in the right way, at the right time, for the right students? How do we provide the support and training for staff to recognize what that looks like? And then how do we track that over time and hold ourselves not just accountable, but capable of moving the needle for our students who struggle the most? And so I think that's the power of that data, is it will always keep in front of us those students who need additional support, those ways where we can continue to improve, and those things that we can do, those low burden, high impact practices that are really just heart-centered practices that we will know that some students will need more of that. but now we have a chance of knowing who those students are and reaching out, as we've seen a lot of times during distance learning, that many of our students who we couldn't see that they were struggling, we can now hear their feedback and can reach out and connect with them in ways to help them feel more connected. And many of our school counselors and school social workers and staff have reached out in, hundreds of thousands of different ways over the last 10 months to do that. So I appreciate your attention to that, Director Hine, and I look forward to us continuing that conversation down the road where we see that those statistics improve and those stories have better endings.
And you may have a second part, sorry. You may have already said this and I just missed it because there's activity going around me at home here. Do we know who these kids are, or is this all anonymous? Do we know who they are so that we can reach out specifically to these kids that could be in trouble?
Yeah, Director, I appreciate you calling attention to that. So we have confidential feedback that students provide. So we have just a limited number of people, trained professionals, school counselors, school psychologists, social workers, district leaders who can identify students who have shared that they don't feel a sense of hope, that they don't feel safe. And that's been one of the ways that we've been able to reach out to families since last spring, is we've identified students who say, I don't feel loved, I don't feel safe, I don't feel like I'm connected. And that's been a tool that many of our school counselors have used and our school teams have used to identify and reach out to students who they may not have known were struggling.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Vice Chair Bethel, you're going to say something.
Well, I have a couple of things. One, I love seeing this data, and I know I've really been interested since I've been on the school board. And before, actually, I think this is probably a driving factor that had me run, was just really trying to connect our students to a healthy life. And it's not a secret that I'm a mom and I have 2 kids in the district. And I'm curious though. So, my high school student, she's ebbs and flows every day. It's something different. And maybe you catch her on an off day for this survey. How often does this survey get presented to our students in a way to where you're collecting a really good baseline data to determine risk for particular kids that are on that very low end that we very much need to support? And then secondly is capacity is an issue for all entities on the planet right now. But even before we went into this, remote life, capacity was an issue. And I just wonder when and how the district is really going to reach out into the community and start really establishing community partnerships to deal with that capacity issue, to start reducing some of these barriers of helping kids into that next phase of belonging. Because I think belonging in school also triggers maybe lack of belonging in their community, and particular things that are more holistic outside of that space that they're in, yes, very much every day. But when they walk off campus, it's very likely that they don't just automatically belong out here too.
Mm-hmm. Vice Chair Bethel, I appreciate your insight there, because you're calling attention to a very real concern we've had for a long time, which is, how can we continue to keep our finger on the pulse of student well-being, sense of belonging? How can we match the right level of support with the available resources? So to your first point, our natural rhythm to asking these questions is fall and spring. And so there's getting a snapshot, a baseline snapshot in the fall and a baseline snapshot in the spring. That's the usual rhythm. We now will have the capacity to do monthly, for example, or bi-monthly check-ins with some students who may have shared with us some concerning behaviors or some concerning thoughts. And so we'll have the ability to be more efficient in how we respond to those students. As far as what that looks like in our community partnerships, David Fender has worked very, very hard in developing partnerships with Marion County, Polk County, Trillium, and now Stronger, Oregon, to make sure that we're having similar conversations about school mental health. We've recently entered into more conversations with WESD, who is also looking to make sure that we remove many of the silos associated with getting access to care. That's one of the things with Stronger Oregon is they're able to serve both private insurance and Medicaid. And that's been a gap in service for a very long time. So I think what we have before us is the capacity to move forward in more efficient ways. And it will require all of us being on the lookout for ways we can improve, looking at ways we can develop those relationships and those connections in the community, and really be focused on how can we make sure that no student falls through the cracks here.
Any other questions, Directors? Director Blasi, then we'll go to Director Leopold.
Thank you. Chris, one that you pointed out that in this environment, there are a few advantages. And in this case, the ability to connect maybe more with students on a one-on-one basis. I appreciate that. And have us back to the data and how the data might be used to inform policy. And maybe it's not enough data, enough responses to actually inform policy. But for example, a couple things maybe the improvements that the district has seen in relationships and with, I would say, particularly Native American Pacific Islander students. I'm just wondering if you all look to kind of, I don't know, extrapolate or just try to apply meaning to what you're seeing. And because, obviously emphasis has been placed at a couple of those programs. And so whether or not you're able to go back and say, okay, this investment is actually working, but maybe we need to tweak it here. And then I have a follow-up to that but it's kind of opposite.
Okay.
Go ahead, Director Blassie.
Okay. And then so part of that is, for example, there was a number with regards to white students who feel connected to their teachers. I'm just curious if there's any type of analysis or just thought around that, because a majority of our teachers are white versus, so few of our teachers relative to students of color. Just that type of questioning and planning for the future, and just taking that data and maybe taking it that next step for policy.
Yeah, thank you, Director Blassie, for that question. And you're actually right now, actually role modeling the data inquiry protocol we're encouraging teams to take, which is, remembering to center ourselves in the data is storytelling and we are the narrators. Statistics are great descriptors of groups or population. They're terrible descriptors of individuals and the individual stories behind them. And we're early in our work here, and we have 3 definitive data points. We would want to be very, very careful with how we interpret the data, and make sure that it is an invitation for us to wonder and notice and be on the lookout for bright spots or promising practices that are making the difference. But know that our work is never done, and that the process of asking students and staff and families questions is an intervention in and of itself. And so we want this to be an ongoing conversation, so we can say, great, we've made progress in this area. How can we get better? Here's a group of students we didn't previously identify as struggling, specific demographic. How do we target our resources in efficient ways to make sure that they're getting what they need? And so this will be a data inquiry protocol over time of telling stories about what's happening in our district, but hopefully also telling stories about what interventions work, which ones don't, so we can direct our energies elsewhere and make sure that we're still focused on equitable student outcomes at the end of every single day, and that what our conversations look like around these issues are anchored in that work.
Thank you. Dr. Leopold, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. No, and I appreciate the questions that our fellow board members have brought up. I think they're really good and insightful as we're looking onto this. One thing that I've always kind of noticed is when we're looking at, relationships or, the positive outlook on teams really is whether it was school, hiring employees or, work-related stuff, or even a board, is the culture has a big impact on the success or whether or not people feel included or relationships, etc. And I noticed that looking at the data, right, we saw a huge increase with the elementary teacher-student relationships, and of course with specific demographics with the secondary. But these are all like in the double digits, right? Which means that it seems like it's bigger than just 1 or 2 things. And so I'd love to hear more about what was done between 2018 to 2019 to make these kids feel like they have better relationships with their teachers, because what I would like to see is for us to raise the bar for everybody. Because as you're looking at the data, yes, there's differences between race by a couple percentage points, depending on what the one you're looking at, right? Some of them are more dramatic. For example, secondary teacher-student relationships, our Hispanic students are 50%, Native Hawaiian are 59%. That's 10% difference. That's a pretty big difference. But when it comes to like elementary school, they're all within around the same-ish area. And so if we can do an increase like that, where we're up by like double digits in almost every demographic, I think that would be huge. And so I'd love to hear what we did to achieve those increased results and see if it's replicatable for secondary and other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Director Lippold. And again, this is another example of modeling that data inquiry process, which is taking a look at the data, wondering about it before we make judgments about what possibly might have caused it, and really ask more questions. That's what we're trying to get to here. So we can never definitively know exactly what causes some of these numbers to increase. That's the difference between correlation and causation. That there's sometimes there's a correlation between asking people the questions that lets them know that you care about it. That in and of itself can sometimes cause an increase in perceptions around teacher-student relationships or sense of belonging. But that's important, and that's good. That's a good thing. So then we have to ask the question, what are some of the systems that we have in place right now that are either helping those areas improve or acting as barriers for them to improve? And I think one of those is moving from that mentality of fixing students to moving to the mentality of fixing systems. So what is it about some of those systems at the elementary school level that tend to enhance those teacher-student relationships? What are some barriers that may get in the way there? And how might that differ at the secondary level? And then we might ask the question, and again, in service to your point, in service of all students seeing those improvements in sense of belonging and teacher-student relationships, how may we identify some promising practices within each school? Because each school is culturally responsive to understanding their own needs, listening to staff about their understanding of the school climate and culture there, and saying what are some low burden, high impact things that we as a team can agree to do that are evidence-based, that make a difference, and then we're going to take a risk and courageously stand up front, and we're going to balance that need of the whole child with their need for academic achievement in service of equitable student outcomes. And so I think you're absolutely right to spotlight that difference, and that we need to continue to have that conversation over time in each of our schools and then across the district. And this is a forum for that to happen as well.
Director Kyler, do you have a question?
No, my questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
If there is no other question, can I ask a question, Dr. Moore? Mm-hmm. This is a very important thing you're highlighting. It's basically school connectedness. It's like a measure for school connectedness. It's pretty life-saving because children who are not connected are high risk for suicide, absenteeism, and all the bad outcomes. And those who are connected do well. When you take this and overlap it with, say, Oregon Teen Suicide Survey, like Teen Health Survey, that shows like 50% of children who are like gay, who identify as gay and lesbian in 8th graders struggle with suicidal thoughts. Or if you overlap this with teachers, Panorama teacher engagement version, is there any way we can connect the dots between different types of connectedness measure, whether teacher connectedness to the thing like teacher or teen suicide survey, or the attendance and engagement? Because then you get a composite score which makes more sense rather than just looking at it in isolation.
Right. Yeah, so I think anytime we want to make sure we're asking questions of lots of different stakeholder groups and we're looking at lots of different sources of information. So, the Oregon Healthy Teen Survey is a great example that will be interesting to see how does that line up with some of the data that we already have. What connections can we draw from sense of belonging and teacher-student relationships to suicidal ideation or risk for anxiety and depression? How about other high-risk behaviors? So, again, this is not for one person or a small group of people to figure out and draw connections and say that this is why X, Y, and Z is happening. Our hope is that by building the capacity for all of us to talk about these things in meaningful ways and really truly own this work and the interpretation of the data and listening to the stories and coming up together with solutions to make it better, that's one of the most important solutions, or the lever and a place to stand for us to move this forward. So it doesn't just live with one person. It doesn't just live in one dashboard. It lives in our day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month conversations, and is directly connected to each and every student's life. We bring with it a spirit of curiosity, of engagement, of wonder, so that we don't make up our minds about what the data means before we have a chance to ask more questions and hear more about what might be going on. Because oftentimes what happens is we can surmise what might be happening, but oftentimes it comes up to asking a student, tell me more about what's happening for you. Or a family who's struggling to connect with a school, tell me more what we can do to reach out to you and help you feel more included. Or to a staff member who's struggling to engage with students, how can we come alongside you and see your heart for the work and provide you with the support you need to continue working on this? So I'm excited about this work, Dr. Chandragiri, and I think with all of our minds put together, we have an opportunity to really truly move this work forward, measure our progress with many of the SIA initiatives, and truly be leaders in this state to do school mental health, SEL, equity, in ways that it's never been done before. And that's in no small part due to the leadership in this district to move this work forward. And so I'm thankful for that and appreciate the questions.
Really, thank you. This is an amazing work you're doing, and you're just setting the stage for, addressing at a population level, health, learning, and safety of our children. And thank you. Maybe at some stage we can put all our heads together and hopefully our kids will be safe and healthy. Because without this, the achievement gap will be hard to close if this remains this like foundation. We need to move on. So if any other questions, I'm sure there are a lot of nice questions, and Dr. Moore, we're going to send a question your way to the Superintendent Perry, because this is an important topic for me at least. My heart and soul is in this, and it's very important.
Yeah, I just want to just say a couple things. One is thank you, Chris, for this work and your leadership around it. I wish the student who wrote Smize knew that they were being talked about tonight, so I might have to screenshot that to see if we can find out what student that was. From a board perspective, some things that are really important. One is that the social emotional learning is prioritized in the strategic plan. It's right in the middle there. You're thinking about how do you demonstrate from a policy, from a results policy perspective, of how do you value this is really important. When I value it, it signals to the organization it's okay to take time to think about student social emotional well-being. Leadership from the top in the way you talk about it and value it in policy and results policy and asking to see the data is kind of how you can think about your role in this. In the budget process, asking the question, should we be adding more community outreach specialists related to this data, again, is really helpful from the board vantage point. So just to kind of wrap that up, if you do have more questions, get those to Alice and she'll get them to Chris. And we'll also have, like I said, the full dashboard. It's not into a dashboard, but it's a PDF version of our results that you can see as well. Because he only gave you 2 indicators tonight. There's lots more there because you can't go through all of it.
Yeah. So
anyway, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
And I think then Chair Chandragiri, did you want to take a short break or do you want
Yes, just before go, actually it's free. You can sign up with that Panorama Institute and you can learn a lot more about it. There are so many different variables. I just signed up. It's free email. Put your name. They'll keep sending you enough literature. It's fun. It's fun. So keep reading. I mean, it's a beautiful topic to read. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Kathy. Now you had a question before you go.
I have lots, but no, I can't keep up. I just got on, so I don't really know where you came from.
Oh, we just finished the panorama and very nice topic. It was fun. Dr. Moore just presented on.
I'm very sorry I missed that. I can't get back on. I can get on with my phone, which I am on now, but I can't get on with my computer.
Oh,
I think there's something going on within the system. I don't know if it's external to us or not, Kathy, so no worries. And we'll have one person reach out to you, Kathy, just to kind of go through any questions you have about the slides.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
Okay. And I'm very sorry. I've done this before.
I think it's not you. Ethan's
Okay.
getting ready to be kicked off too, potentially, for an update.
Well,
okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moore and Superintendent Perry. Thank you for this. We'll take about 5 minutes break if that's okay. Yeah.
So we'll start back at 7:12.
7:12. Reimagining student discipline.
All right, so we're going to give you just an update of where we are with the Reimagining School Discipline and School Safety and Wellbeing Summit, just so you have a high-level overview. This will be much like the student investment account work that will continue to give you updates every single meeting whenever there's time. So that's my goal tonight. We really do need to get to the reentry discussion as well. So again, we'll go very quickly through this. Ethan, if you want to move to the first slide related to that. All right, so I just want to center our conversation on equity for a minute. And we've worked hard to really be sure that we're defining equity both in a community-friendly way and then a staff way as well. So just quickly, all students will have the opportunity and support necessary to succeed. In our internal definition, we go a little bit further than that. As you know, and I'll let you keep moving, Ethan, is we have two processes moving right now, both the Reimagining School Discipline and the Student Safety and Wellbeing Summit. And you can see also how we might think about on the other side of this, what are those social emotional learning competencies that will show progress out of these efforts. So it's a great connector for tonight. With that, Craig, I think you're doing the Reimagining School Discipline portion of this, and we won't read slides, we'll do a quick high-level overview of them.
Thank you. So the Reimagining School Discipline work has started with our formation of a steering committee. And the membership on the steering committee is we have several community members representing different facets of our Salem-Keizer community. We have staff members, including people like CSOCs and community resource specialists and teachers and administrators. We also have students and parents trying to centralize the voice and experience of our most important stakeholders, which are our students, of course. And we have several school-based staff as well. The charge for the committee is to address systems of oppression, engage in cycles of feedback and soliciting information, make recommendations to the superintendent and the district leadership about changes to our discipline structures and policies. And then ultimately, and this is a constant for us, is to work to strengthen relationships with our Salem-Keizer community. So the outcomes from our Reimagining School Discipline work, and I think we need, and Dr. Chandragiri, you alluded to this at our last board meeting, that this is a multi-year vision. This isn't a vision that we can just snap our fingers and say, okay, we've now created a overall vision and system that supports all students. But part of that is revising our discipline practices and policies. We ultimately want to decrease disproportionate exclusionary practices. Some of those may be disciplinary in action. So some of them may be ones that result in a referral or a suspension even. But a lot of our exclusionary practices are simply removing a student from a learning environment. And that impacts student access to core instruction. So the outcomes that we have are holistic and long-term, but they're also ones that have some intermediate steps built in. So on the data review that we conducted most recently, we found that similar to what we thought we would find is that our discipline practices have historically impacted certain groups of kids more than others. And if you look at it through a racialized lens, we know that some kids get more referrals than others. And it's not balanced across all of the groups. And so we have overrepresentation of some of our groups. So based on this data, we decided to go out and focus on conversations with our LGBTQI community, with our Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community, African American, Black, our Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, special education, students who qualify for McKinney-Vento. Remember, those are our students who are experiencing houselessness, and also students who are recent immigrants or migrants to our systems. So we hope to be able to reach out to groups who have been impacted by our discipline practices, just as a first touch point to understand their experiences. Here's a broad timeline. To be able to conduct focus groups, we need to train our facilitators because we need to gather data in a way that can be rolled up into policy decisions. And so it can't just be separate conversations that are held without a way to aggregate that data. So we needed to conduct in some focus group facilitator trainings. We targeted our focus groups in February, and we'll begin those focus group conversations soon. In February and March, we're going to start some school-based conversations as well, anticipating that those will look like one-on-one interviews and some town halls and surveys. We will be putting out town halls at large, so separate from just the groups that we have initially identified that we want to hear from. We want to hear from our overall community as well, because our discipline practices ultimately impact most or all of our kids at some point throughout their experience in school. So we'll also engage in some staff listening sessions to hear from teachers and our classified staff. What do they perceive of as our discipline practices? And then ultimately we'll be hoping that the RSD committee can present recommendations to the superintendent in early May or so. And then we'll be back before the school board in May with some recommendations as to further work. I would anticipate that what we'll say is, these are our first steps, but we'd like to come back to you as we progress in this work. And Dr. Udosinata, you might be muted, my friend. Oh, still can't hear you. Okay. I think it might be your computer.
Dr. Sproles, while you're waiting for Dr. Udosinata to join, is that can we quickly go through a few questions? I see some in the chat room.
Of course.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And somebody in my house just decided to start running a blender. So it's just not my day when it comes to technology. I apologize. So I wanted to speak with you all about the Student Safety and Wellbeing Summit.
Just
so
1 second, Dr. Udosinata. Dr. Chandragiri, would you like to hold the questions until
I apologize.
the end of yeah, he was just starting a question. Do you want to hold the questions till the end, Dr. Chandragiri? Would that work?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize, Dr. Chandragiri, for interrupting you. So, Dr. Sproles just spoke about the Reimagining School Discipline process, which is our internal process, and our external process is the Student Safety and Wellbeing Summit. As you can see, the timeline for our summit is shorter, and what it does do is it involves a lot of critical stakeholders, community advocates, experts from the field, who will, with the purpose of really looking closely at systems of student safety and well-being, and creating a series of recommendations to the superintendent. You can see here on the meeting outlines, there's a series of objectives, processes, and priorities that start with reviewing our historical perspectives, utilizing data, and really prioritizing incorporating our community-based organizations and our community voice. And importantly, what you see on the bottom bullet there is we want to stay centered on student voice with a focus on those who are most impacted, just like in the Reimagining School Discipline process. So, like I mentioned earlier, our outcomes are to, by March, provide executive summary with recommendations to the superintendent with the goal of improving our overall systems of safety for students and making sure that we are almost giving a tune-up to our systems of safety and well-being by incorporating voice and bringing the experts to the summit and having those really important conversations at the summit. Now, you might be thinking, what are the next steps? And I'm having some trouble. There you go. I'm advancing the slide here. So our next steps is to bring an outside facilitator who will support us in the design of the summit. And we don't have as tight of a timeline with the summit as the RSD process, because we want this to be a process where there's a certain level of elasticity, but we do want to make sure that we are providing some level of recommendation to the superintendent by March. So the timeline is relatively short. So we're in the process of finalizing contracts with the external facilitator. And what you need to know about the facilitator is they went through a procurement process where we solicited input from the community. And this group that this external facilitator, they have a high level of skill in terms of facilitating a process like this. They have great perspective and a lot of experience in education and working with communities. And they have a heart with the work. And I think they're going to bring a lot of a collaborative mind to the work and really help us to get the most out of the summit. So our final steps before we launch the summit is to secure the contract with the external facilitator, and we hope to do so this week. And then they'll have the opportunity to familiarize themselves with our community. And then we need to identify our partners and make sure that all the right people are at the table and we're as inclusive as possible. So those are our next steps. We're really excited about kicking off the summit soon.
All right, now let's open up for questions.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Udosinata and Dr. Sproles. I think I want to open the question. I think Director Hyan had a question.
Yes, thank you. So on the one slide where you are starting the targeted focus group discussions, is the board being invited to those discussions?
Director Hyan, I think that would be something we can discuss with board leadership. The sensitive nature of these discussions, a lot of times when parents are talking about their experience with discipline systems, those conversations are very, very sensitive and personal. So originally we were thinking of running some bigger focus groups, and the feedback that we got from our school principals and teachers were they think the conversations would be better if they were more intimate in fewer groups. And so I'm not sure what that would feel like to a parent if there were other participants in that. However, what I would offer for the school board is we will have larger listening sessions, more community-based listening sessions. And I think that would be an appropriate place for school board members to be listeners or participants in those, similar to the SIA work, Director Hyan.
Let's start with the advisor. Maybe Intan, do you have any question?
I might have missed this, but on the reimagining school discipline, is there students that have been through the disciplinary system being a part of that, process?
Yes, great question. And yes, there are. And we have students on the steering committee. And then of course, the people we'll be talking to are students who have been impacted by our systems, particularly for our middle school and high school students. We'll be talking to more elementary parents because that discussion is held probably better for parents at that grade level. But for middle and high, yes.
And it's really important we center on the kids that have been, students that have been impacted negatively by the system. So thank you for that, Lynette.
Director Kylo, do you have any questions? Director Blasi, do you have any questions?
Just one quick, the facilitator that you're looking to hire, do they have experience engaging and encouraging traditionally underserved or underrepresented communities? One of the things I appreciated at the conversation earlier, or maybe it was in this one, is also including homeless students. So do they have that experience encouraging communities that may not feel as welcome or?
Yeah, so just to answer that question, the answer is yes, and they have extensive experience with several districts, especially in California, in districts that are primarily districts with students of color, and then also within New York. So they have experience all over the nation, and they really are not only fixed on they're not only have experience on working with communities of color, but they also really understand the importance of community engagement. So not necessarily just from the institutional standpoint, while they do have a lot of expertise with the institution, but bridging that with the community, which we think is really important in this process.
Thank you.
And Director Blasi, what I might offer is we are still in negotiations around the final contract part. As soon as we have that, we can bring back a more complete picture of who we're talking about. So it's a little bit of that process. As soon as that has been completed and all the ink has dried, then we can bring back a little bit more information, possibly even next week.
Yeah, we're hopeful that that will be done this week. And part of we wanted to be sure that our community had some input in the process from our community that doesn't come as easily to want to give feedback. So that's part of what we were really thoughtful of, that step in the procurement process.
Director Leopold.
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, first, I just want to say that, I mean, those are great questions. And this looks very much like a process I was suggesting that we should do as a board that's collaborative and brings in stakeholders about 6 months ago. And so I hope that, you know, as a board, we can learn from this and recognize that sometimes letting go of 100% of control over some of these decisions can help us go in the right direction and do things the right way. But honestly, I mean, I think this looks really good. My one question is going to be, it's pretty clear kind of how the process is going to be driven and who's doing what. My one question is, maybe this was already hit on, for example, as the board, it's like a twofer. One is, what can the board do to help promote and participate the best that we can? And then the second part of that is, what is the board's role within this process? And like what of these stakeholder groups or town halls, et cetera, would the board be participating in?
Yeah, and how about, if you don't mind, if we come back to that question next week, and as we get especially on the safety and wellbeing summit side of it, get the external facilitator hired, because that's the exact questions that we want to think about, is how do we navigate spaces? And as we've gotten that distance on the reimagining school discipline, we're at that point now as well. And two things I think that are also important, that we're getting some technical assistance from the Oregon Department of Education in a collaborative thought partner way that we've never really experienced with Oregon Department of Education before. So they're kind of our thought partners on this. So, and their student equity office type group of people through Carmen are working with us on that. And then also on the safety, or on the reimagining school discipline, Willamette ESD is helping us with the data collection.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Director Goss, do you have any questions?
No, not unless you know how to get my sync done. That's what keeps popping up, that I'm not syncing with the meeting. As a result, I'm not getting in.
Or are you
Anybody
able to
know how to do something about that?
Are you able to listen to at least the conversation in your phone?
Yes, I can do that.
All right. Is there any question based on what you heard so far on
No, there is not.
All right. Vice Chair Bethel, do you have any? Yeah. So if no one else has any other questions, I think I really hope that this will take us to the next level. And for this redesigning discipline, are there going to be participants or stakeholders from different school district, zones, and we have different people who have shown interest in participating in both the Safety Summit and redesigning the discipline. Will there be a multi-group, because we are close to 90 different communities in this district. And when I look at the data, it cuts across everybody, though there is disproportionate children of color who have been disproportionately affected. So will there be a way to involve different communities so that we can kind of think in terms of what I call my equity 2.0, where we may have to have a different interventions for different communities who have been affected?
So Chair Chandragiri, for the, especially on the reimagining school discipline side of it, well, also on the Safety Summit, but specifically on the reimagining school discipline side of it, remember, we're doing district level, kind of those small focus groups, getting at different groups that might have a smaller number in them, especially. And then we're also going to be doing some school-based outreach and then town hall. So there's multi-layers on purpose because there are so many different cultures and communities within Salem-Keizer. And we just are doing it one step at a time. Tonight we shared kind of where we were headed with these are the district run process, but every school will run a process too. So we keep getting more and more into the process.
Yeah.
And then as
we lost
facilitator, we'll really look at, again, how do we capture the community within the process.
2018, in the youth age 10 to 24 in Oregon, suicide became the leading cause. Before 2018, it was unintentional injuries. Somehow the numbers flipped. And, we lost close to 6 or 7 students to suicide in our own school district. And in Sprague, lost 3 or 4 that year, 2 17 days apart. So it is really, it all comes down to safety in different ways, and suicide, violence, bullying. It's kind of widespread and different communities are involved. So it'll be really important to kind of see how we can get participation, because one outcome in this equity would be safety. That is one thing we all can agree. Second outcome will be none of our children should end up in juvenile justice system. That could be another outcome. And then we can start designing how different communities, we may have to uniquely tailor the intervention if needed, and also to listen to different communities. That's what I'm hoping comes out of this, rather than form a solution and then say everybody follow the thing, because in such a large population, we may have to have some unique, it's like a menu of options that we can scale it up.
Dr. Chandragiri, what I might add, just to build on what we heard from Chris Moore earlier today, that's a really good example of how different schools took the Panorama data to fit their population. So the one-on-one empathy interviews that were videotaped and then shared with staff members to understand a sense of belonging, those were done specifically with different groups of kids that were exhibiting a lack of that. So, and that wasn't something that was come up as a district intervention. That was designed by teachers and administrators at a specific school. So I do think we can create space for that. And I think it is, what you're saying, I really appreciate, is to kind of link that conversation about well-being and safety and security, which we think a lot of times as emotional and psychological safety, as well with the idea of physical safety and how those two things relate to each other. So I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question? So we can move on to the next topic. Very good. Superintendent Perry, go ahead.
There we go. Everything's slow tonight.
Well, you have 1 hour, close to 1 hour.
All right. So the next portion of our work session tonight is around back to in-person instruction. And I'll just say again that the Ready School Safe Learners guidance dropped today about 1 o'clock, and then we were getting updated for it till about 4 with it for till about 4 o'clock this afternoon. So there are a few things that we just are unsure about as it relates to the guidance. So we're just going to take it one day at a time and do our best to be sure that we have a path forward for implementing the guidance and getting kids back to in person. So if you'll go ahead and advance, Ethan. But today we're going to do the RSSL updates, how we're going to work to expand limited in person and secondary, how we're thinking about expansion of extracurricular activities and some of the challenges with that, and then how we're going to continue to plan for blended learning. If you want to go on to the next, you saw last night that over the weekend, Marion County specifically, they're close behind us in Polk County as well, got approval through the Oregon Health Authority to start vaccinations. So for educators, Marion County is first in the state to do this. We have lots of other superintendents wondering how we pulled this off. I thanked our county commissioners for their work and our close partnerships. This is a time when partnerships have paid off because we had these partnerships before COVID and they've strengthened during COVID. And when we need to implement something, our partnerships are already solid. So that really helps. We know who to call. So we've had a number of employees that went to the fairgrounds and were approved because they were approved by Marion County as part of Group 1. People like our speech and language pathologists, our special education teachers who are caring for medically fragile kids, bus drivers who transport them. Those were considered Group 1. We got that approval through Marion County Health Department. And then we were able to start today with other educators within our system. My guess is we may have had 1,000 or more educators today, but I don't know that for a fact. I'm just guessing by the lines. We are prioritizing that it is our elementary staff, our secondary staff who are responsible for limited in person, and any district level staff that work directly with kids. So like the community outreach specialists out of Cynthia's office, out of the equity office, they're going to kids' homes, bringing them to school. And so we prioritize those sorts of district level positions. The authority that Marion County got did not force us to prioritize, but we know based on the supply of the vaccine that it was really important to prioritize. So that work was done by our commissioners in Marion County Public Health over the weekend. And we just have to continue to send our appreciations for Salem Health, Marion Polk County Health Departments, and our county commissioners who are really pushing the state forward in these efforts. We're way more organized and articulated than a lot of places. One thing I heard today is there is a New York Times article, I believe, I hope I have it right, it's called Underselling the Vaccine. And the New York Times article really talks about the importance of the safety of the vaccine and some of the 4 to 5 key things about the vaccine that I think is just a great article and we should be talking about. I did a first glance through it this afternoon and I'll get you the link to it in your email. But again, important to talk about the importance of vaccination. The goal is to get to that herd immunity so that we can get kids back in school fully at some point in the future. That means everyone back in without face coverings and without distance, but we have to have herd immunity first. So that's part of that. So the next slide is related to the metrics. They did change the metrics. So you'll see that greater than 350 is now the new metric. That was at 200. And the metrics are now advisory. But I want to, even though this is small, I really want to center your attention on the yellow or the orange and the red columns, because that's our signal of, that's the advice they're giving us. And in order to move into blended learning, we have to take what our metrics are telling us and figure out how we start slow to begin expanding based on our recommendations locally. And so if we were in the yellow right now, we would be having a really different conversation about how do we get more and more and more kids back in person. But for right now, as being in the red, where I think we're at 480 something for our metrics per 100,000. They did drop in Marion County. They increased a little bit in Polk County, but so decrease in metrics is good, but we've got to persist in Marion County on the safety protocols in order to get more and more kids back in schools. So at this metric level, we will have to start really slow and prove that we can do this, and then expand as we prove that we safely do it. We practice our safety protocols. We know if we follow them, kids are safe at school, and then we start the next grade level. So know that that's an important thing. The next slide just highlights a couple other things that came out today. So yes, the metrics are advisory. On-site testing is going to be required for counties or school districts that are in that red column in the high risk area. So that's going to be required on March 1st. What I believe happened this afternoon is that Oregon Health Authority released their toolkit or guidance or procedures for how schools will have the ability to do on-site testing. So while on-site testing is advisory, unless you're in the red, if you're in the red, if kids experience symptoms at school, you have to initiate that rapid test. There are tests, as I understand it, that are pretty easy and can be self-administered. But again, we've got to look at that guidance that was supposed to be released about 4 o'clock today from Oregon Health Authority. So that's a hiccup in our system that we've got to figure out. What does it tell us? How do we do it? How can we be sure that our staff are trained in order to do that, in order to have that in-person instruction at the elementary level in March. So we have to be ready for that. So that's one of the first things that we'll do tomorrow, is start looking at that on-site testing requirement. Athletics, PE, visual and performing arts, they're still aligned with our county metrics. So if you remember our county metrics, things like gyms aren't open. Large gathering spaces aren't open. So some of those things that we bring in, like PE, they're still aligned to county metrics. ODE is trying to pull those apart. I think they may have the PE one pulled apart, but again, without time to fully read the depth of the guidance, it's I just don't quite know how that plays out yet. So when we get to that point, we're going to say we don't know yet. And the other clear thing in the guidance was there are things that are required, and you have to do those things that are required. That's how you get the COVID liability protection that the state legislature passed whenever they passed it, December. So the requirements we have to follow. There's things that are advisory or your choice, some further recommendations. So we, again, have to go through all that guidance to be sure that we're meeting all those before we can reopen. And those haven't changed a lot, but there's some little changes that I saw initially that we'll just need to check our systems. Again, how we also are sure we can do the contact tracing and the on-site testing and start slow. And what's that look like on buses? All of that we're kind of worrying deeply about tonight. Even though at the same time, I just need you to hear me, like we are still working hard and are committed to figuring out how we bring back our youngest learners in person as quick as we can. So that's still, even after what felt like hard news today, we are still on that path to do that. And you'll see what our timeline of what we're thinking about. I think another key important thing that I know our community members often ask about is what about state testing? ODE is still pursuing a waiver for SBAC state testing. And we'll know more about that later, but that's still in the mix. And we're hopeful that they get approval in that. There's, of course, a transition in DC, and how that transition interacts with states will be new, and that waiver process will go into that. All right, so next, Dr. Sproles, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. One thing I would just build on what Superintendent Perry just said is, for the testing waiver, we have heard that ELPA 21, which is our English language proficiency assessment, which impacts about 30% of our students, will still be required, as well as progress monitoring testing for students who qualify for an IEP, or students who have a disability. So those two testing components will still move forward because they're essential to be able to have those students qualify for those additional services. So here's the timeline as to put some dates to what Superintendent Perry alluded to. So we are still on track to begin a blended model for our earliest learners for K1 as early as late February. I think I might be getting some, are you hearing that there's a little bit of an echo?
There's normally an echo when somebody is running their computer in the same room as somebody else, or if you have dual machines going at the same time, like an iPhone or an iPad, or and a computer at the same time.
I think magically, Dr. Udosanata, when you came on, it solved it. So there's some magic touch that you have that I don't hear it anymore. I didn't hear it.
It's about time.
I know, finally you come through. So we're still shooting for a late February, and we have been getting a lot of questions saying, can we just have a specific date? And we still have logistics that we need to work out on a specific date. Some of the things that are in the Ready School Safe Learner guidance that just came out this afternoon are going to require us to figure out and problem solve. We have been working very collaboratively with our teachers union and our classified union to be able to problem solve these models. And we have a meeting with our teachers tomorrow afternoon that we are hoping to get more feedback on. So in late February or March, then we'll add grade levels incrementally. And again, this is working in coordination very closely with Marion and Polk. And their suggestion was that we add a grade level, stabilize, make sure things are solid, make sure we're following our blueprints and our protocols are in place before adding another grade level. So that's exactly what we're going to do in constant communication with Marion and Polk. Our hope is to still have a K-5 blended model to be able to get it up and running for about a week before spring break, so we can see what that stabilization looks like. It also gives us that if we do need to isolate some cohorts, we have spring break for that time. So that's our goal for our elementary timeline. For our secondary timeline, for third quarter, we're focusing on expanded limited supports. And particularly, we've heard loud and clear from the board, but also from other people in the community, that we need to focus on high school seniors. And that's exactly what our high schools are doing, starting as early as this week, actually. Bringing in students who may be credit deficient or may not be on track to graduate. We need to really be able to provide extra supports for them. We're also focused on students with disabilities and other struggling students. So groups of students like freshmen, for instance, we know as a data point that if we can make sure that freshmen are on track, they have a much higher likelihood of graduating in 4. So another thing for third quarter is our OSAA guidelines, which Superintendent Perry alluded to. These guidelines are still tied to our county COVID-19 metrics, and it's not a recommendation, it's a requirement right now. So remember that metrics are one data point for us to be able to think about bringing students back for in-person, but they are the data point for OSAA guidelines. So our goal is to still expand enrichment and extracurricular, because we know that's how kids get connected to schools, but we're going to do that under tight restrictions following the guidelines, as Marion County is still in the extreme risk category. And then for fourth quarter, and fourth quarter, just as a time frame, begins about April 12th. Is when we would be thinking, Director Bethel, I was trying to see the timelines as you were pointing with them in the chat. I appreciate that. So for just as a timestamp, third quarter will start the 1st of February. So February 2nd, I think, is our first instructional day. And fourth quarter starts the second week of April. So right after spring break. And so the second week of April, if our elementary model is solid, if things have been going well with our protocols, as we have a chance to see with the new Ready School Safe Learners, we'd look to transition to a secondary blended learning model. And it's going to really depend on operational constraints. The big choke point we have right now is transportation, and being able to transport all of our students with the new protocols is something that we're working on really hard day by day. So Dr. Udosanatad, do you want to take over the next ones, talk about cohorting?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so I want to revisit this topic of cohorts. When we presented last week, we talked a little bit about what an A-Day, B-Day model might look like, and we discussed cohorts. And what I want to do is speak with you just momentarily about what cohorts are, why cohorts, and what are the parameters for cohorts. Now remember that when we bring students back in a blended model, we will need to bring students back in cohorts, right? So cohorts are a consistent group of students who are grouped together during the school day. Cohorts can be up to 100 students, right? And what that means is there would be almost like a scheduling bubble around that student, so that the students within a cohort, so they have limited interaction and exposure to students from a different cohort within the same building. And the intention behind this is if we can reduce the amount of exposure that students have with other cohorts, then we can minimize the amount of learning lost if there was a cohort or if there was a COVID exposure and we needed to quarantine students and they needed to go from a blended model, going to school every other day, back into a full CDL model during quarantine, right? So additionally, by having a cohort, it helps us to support our contact tracing, which is really important should there be an exposure, right? Or even a COVID outbreak. And so our operations team and our building principals do a really good job at looking at all the details to make sure we can do the best job to cohort our students. But it also is a major scheduling lift for our building teams, building administrators. Things that you need to know, per the Ready School Safe Learners guidance, cohorts could be up to 100 kids. It's 35 square foot per person, not per kid, but per person. That includes teachers and other staff in the space. So it's about 15 to 20 students per classroom or people per classroom, depending on the size of the class. And we have to do our best to maintain that 6 feet of physical distancing. And so what that does is that it influences the way that we're able to bring kids back to school, which is why we have this model that we illustrated for you last week, which is the A-Day, B-Day model, so that we can have, that we can meet the cohort guidelines. We would need to have one set of students be in the A-Day model, and they would meet on Tuesday, Thursday, and another set meet on Wednesday, Friday. And on the off days, what they would do is they would engage in a variety of synchronous and asynchronous lessons to continue their learning when they weren't at school. And so this is what our current blended model looks like. Now, what we'll do is we'll look at at the updated guidance, and we'll look at all of our resources and what we're able to do. And we will come out with a finalized schedule for elementary and high school when we can, right? But this is our initial thinking of what our model looks like, and this is how our schedules are designed right now, is for students to be in an A-Day, B-Day model. And what this also does is allow students to go back into comprehensive distance learning if they needed to due to COVID or metrics being really high and us having to go back to learning it online. All right, and that's all I really have to share with cohorting and how that influences our models.
And one of the comments for Director Hyen is this sounds like it would be very difficult to schedule at our high schools. And you're exactly right. That is the big barrier to overcome, is how do you schedule, how do you cohort, how do you have staff not interact with more than however many cohorts. And it's a very complicated jigsaw puzzle. Go back to my analogy from the summer.
And our curriculum assistant principals have just done a remarkable job of being highly organized, very creative, and also open to any suggestions and asks and trying to make it happen for students. And so they've done a good job to maintain these cohorts. Should we get our metrics in a space, and should we have an opportunity to bring our students back in person, our curriculum assistant principals have just done a remarkable job. So I want to point that out.
Could I just add one thing to that, Director Hyen, that I just think it's important for us to understand the trade-off of cohorting is lack of choice, which our high schools are built around students being able to choose what classes they want, which makes creating cohorts almost impossible. And Lynette, you can speak to this, but even a person, you know, at a school like McKay, you probably have contact with 400 or 500 students easy in a day if you run through your entire day with choice. And so that's what we're trying to straddle here. That's the complexity, is that we have lots of seniors who have totally unique schedules just to them. And then try to figure out how to cohort that is very complex.
And one of the complexities at all levels is finding creative ways to have instruction with specialty teachers or services from specialty staff. So we're thinking PE teachers, music teachers, librarians, those who would normally interact with every single student in the student body within a given week, and finding creative ways to make sure that all students have access to PE, music, et cetera, the library, while also making sure that we wouldn't have to close down the whole school should that staff member be exposed or infected with COVID. And there's some creative solutions that we're looking at with that.
So I believe John Bate
will speak about substitutes.
Yeah, thank you. As we think about bringing students back, that means, of course, staff will be back in person. And one of the things that we have been adjusting to in CDL is that with the ability to do synchronous and asynchronous learning, we have had less reliance on our substitutes. But I wanted to take a moment and do a shout out to all the substitutes who currently work and have worked for us, and give the board a little update as to why we're monitoring this, so that we're well equipped to support students as they return, when they're able to return in person. Right now, we do utilize substitutes in our CDL model, and we have a team of folks that are covering those vacancies for us, and we're grateful for that. We have active communication with the folks in the substitute pool throughout the year. And I was pleased to be reminded recently that many of the folks who continue to be signed up to substitute for us are really waiting for in-person assignments. That's really what they thrive on and look forward to. And so we know we have a large group of folks who are just waiting for that to happen. And because they are district employees, we've been able to communicate with them that as the vaccine is available to our staff and our educators, they too can participate in that process. I want to just let the board know that all throughout this year and every year, we continue to hire substitutes every month of the calendar year, and that's currently happening. This year, we knew that it was also going to be a lot of new uncharted territory, and we felt it was important to increase the hourly rate that we provide our substitutes. And so I'm pleased that we've been able to do that, and hopefully that will continue to honor their work, as well as put us in a position to make sure folks want to come to Salem-Keizer to do their substituting. And the last thing I'll mention is that we have ongoing relationships with our universities, allows substitutes to begin working when they finish a program but are waiting for their license. The Teachers Standards and Practices Commission works with us and provides an opportunity for new teachers to do that.
All right, Sylvia, you're up.
Thank you, Superintendent Perry. Can everybody hear me? I didn't get a mic check, so I just want to make sure you all hear me. One of the things that I heard tonight, or several things I heard tonight from folks, was engagement, relationships, diversity, you know, the different languages that we have. We have over like 80 languages in the school district. So when we're talking about communications, a lot of times people think it's just like one way flowing outward. But with communications at Salem-Keizer, which I'm very proud of, is a two-way approach to communications. We want to make sure all of our families are included, down to the 42 that may be impacted, just as a small group of families. We want to make sure they hear and engage in everything that we do when it comes to this. So when it comes to the communications around what we're planning, we're looking at it as we were hearing that we have to kind of make sure we do this slowly when we're talking about reentry. And we've always stated that we're talking about bringing back our youngest learners first. This communications timeline focuses on elementary. That is the sequence that we're in right now. And I do want to say to everyone, this doesn't mean that secondary is not planning. They are planning. I was with the secondary team earlier today, and they were talking about their timeline and what that would look like after elementary got started and settled. So what we're looking at this week has been the week of continued conversations, very thoughtful conversations with our staff, very thoughtful conversations with our associations, which is very critical. Getting lots of calls from press. And like I said before, we want to make sure internally we're all on the same page, we're all in agreement before we take it out to our families. Next week is the week that we are talking about doing some parent forums. And these parent forums are going to take the shape of 2 parent forums, but other outreach activities as well. So it's critical for everyone to understand that, again, we have other languages in the school. We have a wonderful translation team. We have a wonderful outreach team through Equity that helps us to get out and talk to families about what we're doing. So what we have talked about for next week, the week of the 25th, is to get the word out to our families through multi-communications. And I say multi because one size does not fit all. I want to stress that. We have a variety of different ways that we do this, from grassroots to digital. And so while we're getting the word out through all of our different families and using all of our partners, whether they're internal and external, we are going to be organizing 2 major parent forums. One will be English next Thursday. That is the tentative date. And then the Spanish language one will be next Friday. Again, that's tentative. And what I wanted to say is that once we set that in stone and make sure that we're doing it, we will get that information out way ahead of time so people will know. It will be on MS Teams. We're looking at the hours from 6 to 7 p.m. in the evening. And the MS Teams information will go out to all of our families to participate. And coming with their questions, we are going to have moderated Q&A. Families will be able to ask questions. Families will be able to share their concerns. And I do want to say that staff have been very, very good about asking families way ahead of time, are you comfortable in coming back? If not, we do have a plan for those families. I did want to stress that. So the Q&A will happen. We will record the event. We will post the recorded event on our multi-channels of social media and YouTube. We will also take those frequently asked Q&A that we turn into frequently asked questions and post those as well in both English and Spanish, and also translate them into our other languages like Swahili, Arabic, Russian, and Marshallese. That excites me when I say that, because this wonderful Salem-Keizer has so many different languages and supporting those languages. So once that happens, we're looking at the planning sequence for secondary the first week in February. And then February 8th, we're looking at school-based Q&As. The principals will lead that. Communications will support. We're providing slides. We're providing talking points and a lot of different things for the principals to be able to be successful. And then from there, we'll be talking about secondary, and that's more to come.
I want to do a quick shout out to SKEA, and I know Ask ESP is right behind them, but SKEA is coordinating a full member and administrator convening around thinking about elementary schedules. And like I said, I know Ask ESP will be next with that. So huge shout out, because we're doing all that two-way feedback as we think about what the schedule might look like. So it's been a great partnership.
Yes. Thank you.
And next up, we have an operations update by Director Mike Wolf, or sorry, Chief Operations Officer Mike Wolf.
Thanks so much. So I think I'm batting cleanup tonight, so there will be a couple more slides. And so just wanted to give you all a quick rundown of where we are from an operational standpoint in these key areas. So clearly our facilities department is focused on the cleaning protocols, classroom configurations, where we're focusing on the hybrid blended at elementary and supporting expanded LIPI at the secondary. We're also maximizing our air intake and our ventilation systems. You know, we had made all those adjustments just before the wildfires. And so we know they work because there was pulling in a lot of, smoke. But we also run, I know there's a lot of questions about HVAC, and we run extended hours on our systems now so that we're pulling in fresh air much more often than we have ever done in the past. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. And our construction and maintenance programs are still on schedule. It's nice to be able to report that some things aren't changing. And so the bond program is still moving forward quite nicely. Transportation, we're focused on moving kids pre-K 12 in LIPI. Also, our transportation system is one of our major food distribution systems at this point, with about 48 sites and a little over 320,000 meals to date through our transportation hub that we have set up at CTEC. One of the things, and I think Craig mentioned this, as we move into the planning for blended, it will be a resource issue for us to overcome. There's no doubt about that. And the more efficient we can be, the better we'll be able to meet the needs. And that's really through our routing and scheduling folks. So they've been doing a great job. And as we continue to implement over the next several weeks, we will also be assessing the capacity that we have in transportation and other areas, but mostly transportation right now, to continue to support our blended and LIPI models. Food services, again, they're operating at over 48 sites, over 2 million meals to date, and that of course includes the transportation as well. When we move into the hybrid model, that will strain our capacity in food service as well. It's logistically more challenging and more staff intensive because we're not currently operating at all of our school sites. And so again, just an opportunity for us to take on. Risk management, of course, the focus there is on managing, mitigating, and eliminating risk. There's only so much you can do in eliminating COVID-19, but the group is actively monitoring all identified COVID-19 positive cases associated with our buildings throughout the district. And they also serve as the primary liaison with OSHA. So any of the complaints, you'll notice that there are some more requirements for OSHA in the latest guidance that came out, and that's our risk management function is the key there. Of course, we have our district operations center. That's really the umbrella organization with multiple disciplines and experience levels that comes together twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. That really provides a continuity of operations from day to day and week to week for the district. I'd also like to mention two other areas. Our district health authority, which has a very active role in the DOC. That's our lead district medical professional and the expertise that allows our DHA administrator to be the lead liaison to our local public health authorities, and it's paying huge dividends for us. and also the COVID-19 response team, which is really HR, our DHA medical lead, risk, and communications. And that group is very active, and Sylvia's a very active member every day. There's a stand-up meeting to go over all of the issues that we're dealing with. And that's really all staff and student tracking and monitoring of COVID. And again, additional coordination with our local public health authorities as well. And I would, before you slip over to the next slide, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our other departments that are working. John obviously talked about substitutes, but HR is doing much more. We also have our budget and financial services that's keeping everything moving, right? When you don't hear about them, that means people are getting paid, and that's a good thing. And of course, technology is doing everything to keep everybody moving. So we appreciate all of that effort. And then the last slide is really, it's things to know. And these are just some one-pagers that we've put together, and we'll continue to keep updated. Everything from left to right of cleaning, everything you always want to know about cleaning protocols is right there in the one-pager. We also have lots of guiding documents. And so thought it would be a good thing to put a one-pager together to show you where to find them. And then finally, a help guide, which covers everything from, gee, what is the district health authority? What do physical distancing coordinators do? What is PPE and how do I get it? Who's in my building? How do I know? How do I get transportation services for students? And what is this thing called COVID-19 response team? So that's kind of a quick rundown of operations in the district, and I'll turn it back over to Superintendent Perry.
Yeah, I will open up for questions in just a minute. And I just think, gosh, there's so much that we keep saying we can't do or we don't do, but we also continue to pivot, continue to grab the latest guidance and process it. And I think on many levels, while we want kids back in person, we should be really proud of the work across the district, from teachers to all departments. Again, just everyone continues to show up every day. And so we feel like that's a good day. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Our plan is that every time we meet with you, we'll give you an update. So and again, next week, even though you're going to work on board development, we'll give you any update we have, and especially as we've dug into the guidance more. So what do you have for questions? I think one is the things to know on our website, the documents of the things to know. Sylvia, is that on the website?
If those are fairly new documents, unless you didn't give them to us, Mike, but I'm sure you have, they should be on the website. I'm going to say yes.
Okay. What are the questions?
I'll just jump in. So way up at the top, you kind of discussed briefly, and I know that this is brand new because I also just saw the RSSL release today. And so I think it's very brave of you guys to launch it out here into the world with kind of the light touches that you've had on it. Thank you for having that courage. But my question is specific to on-site testing. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I think the place in the guidance, because I saw this in the slide today, is related to prioritizing on-site testing. It's our students with disabilities that need assessments for special education. I also believe they're prioritizing some assessments for our English language learners. So those are the type of on-site assessments that they are prioritizing. Also probably things like taking your GED exam could be an on-site thing. But as my first glance at the guidance, that's what I saw in that recommendation.
Okay, so I must have misunderstood entirely because I connected that to COVID, and you guys needed to be administering on-site tests of the COVID test, and I was a bit like,
oh wait,
two different types of testing.
Yeah, there is a requirement on March 1st that if you are a school district in the red category, so above 350 per your metrics, that if you have kids experiencing symptoms on the school site, you have to allow an administration of a quick COVID vaccine test. Those are also the guidance that's coming out from Oregon Health Authority that should be posted tonight, fingers crossed. I believe there is, there's some permissions that are required. So I have not seen all the details on that, but it is a requirement if you're having any kids in person on March 1st and you're in the county or you're in the red zone. I'll just say it like that. But as I saw it, that was a requirement. The tests are coming from the federal government, as I understand it. And I also understand the tests are free. That's as much as I have on the on-site COVID testing.
I think it would be beneficial to have some community information around that, because I, as a parent, don't know that I support that for my student. And so that might be a decision factor for whether I choose to allow my child to come back to school in person, because it is a big deal to certain communities, because that is a medical component and some families will opt out. So I know this is all new, but I just, that alerted me, just knowing who we have out there.
That should be one of our topics next week that we come back with, because that'll give Jody a chance to really view our school health authority nurse. That'll give her a chance to really review the guidance and how it's coming at us, and the toolkit with it, permissions, all of that. And so I think we'll bring that forward to you next time, because it's also a good place for you to ask some questions of us as parents. And then how do we present that to the public and to our parents? And the other worry I got this over the weekend was about our intergenerational families who have intergenerational living, and how are we sure that if we have a positive COVID test, that parents and grandparents who are all living together understand, if their first language isn't English, what they need to do, what's required, because some of our kids are living with very elderly grandparents. So that's the other thing that I think is a equity concern wrapped up in that.
And I don't know if this is food for thought information, but just two things from my day job. We've executed more vaccines in Marion County than we've had COVID positive people to date, by more than 2,000, which is awesome. And also we have not hit what we expected to be the post-holiday spike. And our tests have been very consistent, still the same number of tests over the last few weeks, and our numbers are starting to decrease. So we just need to keep doing the right things, and we need to be very positive, and communication is really important.
Yeah, and some of the things we saw today also in some of the presentation was around, once the numbers start to decrease, people get lax in the safety measures, and we cannot have any lax in our community spread in the safety measures. So as cases decrease, they call it the pandemic fatigue starts to set in, and you're so sick and tired of the pandemic that you think, oh my gosh, I can do this. So really important is to continue to have those numbers down. And I think the next 7 to 14 days also is really critical time for us, as they are thinking about what does that second winter spike look like in counties. So I think the message is be persistent with community care around the virus.
Good job. Is there any other questions? Let me start with Advisor Mabinton and kind of make sure everybody gets a chance.
My questions were around Director Bethel's question, so it was answered. And yes, I like this is going, but obviously we need a lot more. So,
Director Kylo, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. And Director Leopold, do you have any questions?
Yeah, and this may have been answered earlier. So on the suggested timelines for blended learning, I see K1 on here, and then on I see secondary blended learning in fourth quarter. And so that's going to mean both middle school and high school, and that's around April. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And the goal is to start with K1, do it well, and then roll out the next grades after that. So we don't have the exact timeline on that yet, but you could predict that a week to two later, when all the safety procedures are in place, we're doing them well, then we add the next group of kids into the school. And so that's how you'd think about that timeline. Which is, again, kind of hard for families to think about. My K1 will go to school, but my 4th and 5th graders won't, or my 6 through 12 won't. And on cohorting, I think we said this last time, we did try to cohort families in the same cohort. So if you have a 1st, 3rd, and 5th grader, the goal is that your whole family's in cohort A, so that you're not juggling 2 cohort schedules at the same time. We've also tried to do that K-12. I just don't know, I'm just still keeping my fingers crossed that that actually is something we can implement, because you want all the kids in your family to go to school on the same day. But then again, that creates lack of choice for your 6 through 12 in their schedule.
And transportation is no longer, buses are no longer a cohort according to Ready School Safe Learners, but it's still just important for good measure to try to keep them together as much as possible.
Yeah, we have to follow all the protocols as far as distancing, face coverings, cleaning, all of that related to transportation. But for that, they don't count as a cohort. So so if there was an exposure on the bus, you exclude kids on the bus. You don't exclude kids in school.
Director Blasi, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say a huge thank you to this team, obviously, and the rest of your team. But you guys have just got to be tired, exhausted, but still you continue to push ahead every single day. So just a huge, huge, huge thank you. You're just amazing. And I would say especially around communications out. Even though the communications change, I think the fact that you're pushing out communications on a regular basis, it's incredibly helpful to the community. So keep it up and thank you.
Well said, Director Blasi. Director Goss, do you have any? You have to unmute. Director Goss, you have to unmute.
Okay, got it?
Yep.
Okay. I had surprisingly large number of parents call me on middle school, high school sports. Or have we put that into a specific date that we can let them know about?
Yeah, Ethan, can you, I don't know if you'll have it all by memory, but we have athletics going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We have a practice schedule.
Yep. So we have athletics going on right now. We have the season, what they call it, season 1, which is all sports that can participate are participating in workouts. And then season 2, which is the fall sports season, will start February 22nd. As it stands right now with the new update, we need to align with the county metrics when it comes to the participation of certain full contact athletics. Something that, but the OSAA and ODE are still reviewing athletic guidelines, and they'll give us an update hopefully next week. So we'll have a little bit more to share. For my part, I was actually able to pick up my child from cross country workouts yesterday afternoon, and I can say that they were participating. They were exercising physical distancing, and it was nice for them to get out of the house and be doing something active. And so we know that they are participating. And we also are, and we mentioned this earlier, just a little bit, but still developing a plan to create a duality for bringing folks in, our students in for music.
So there's a big concern of whether whether OSAA are helping with our high school students, so they are competitive for scholarships to go on to college. Is that happening?
So I think what you're picking up from emails, because I have a number of emails in my inbox as well, there is a group, and that we have to remember contact sports aren't allowed. So right now with OSAA, so OSAA is saying things like no full contact football, wrestling. I'm not sure all the are counted. Cheer is counted as a contact for competition. Mm-hmm. And so as we approach the next season, there are parents asking, can we not put kids back into football and things like that? And they are citing some things that are coming out of other states as far as what's happening with football and stuff. So I'm going to try to do my best to figure out if I can spend some time really studying how other states are doing it. Because I do think we want kids involved. Like if we can't get them back soon in person, my goal is any sort of an engagement we can do that gets kids active, involved, feeling like they have a team or a club to belong to is really important right now. So I'll try to do my best to begin some research on that. But we do have to follow the OSAA guidance. And we have to, and right now they're saying no contact, which is why you're getting the emails ahead of the switch to the next season. And if you are a footballer or wrestler and who this is your sport, it is heartbreaking.
Director Hyen, do you have any question?
Yes, thank you. Christy, you said the buses weren't cohorted, that if there was an exposure on the bus, that would just be the people on the bus. But if there's multiple cohorts on that bus, the exposure may happen, but you may not know there was an exposure immediately. In fact, you probably won't know that. And so in the meantime, these kids that were exposed have gone to their different cohorts and potentially affected all those cohorts. So I'm just kind of confused.
Yeah, that's how the guidance has been written for us. So that's taken exactly out of the guidance that the transportation, the buses aren't a cohort. And I think we have to remember that right now, they aren't seeing the spread in students. And on the buses, they'll also be doing the safety measures. So face coverings and social distancing and all of that. So that's how they're thinking about it. And with the ODE guidance, they are really trying to follow the science of how the spread is going.
Well, thank you very much. I have a quick question. Thank you for making the vaccines available. I really want to thank all the way Governor Brown and everybody else, county commissioners, OHA, etc. I got my second shot. Please take it when it's available. This is the best that science can provide. From the time the virus became available to the vaccine, this is the shortest time in the history of mankind. So please take it. Let's get our kids back as quickly. Let's take all the necessary precautions. The question I have is there's a lot of learning loss, let's admit it, with this model, whether we kids come back in small batches or no. I'm particularly worried about those who are hurting before the COVID are going to hurt more disproportionately. If you see the attendance, some of the demographic groups that were struggling before are having the largest learning loss, the way they attendance. Is there a way we can use some amount of the Title I dollars to provide two-generation intervention where we can train the parents how to use the computers or how to kind of learn along with the students and probably provide a little bit of extra help? Or because, once the kids are at home, maybe after hours, if parents are a little bit educated or may able to navigate some of these curriculum, then perhaps that will be one saving grace. Does the Title I dollar allow us to do that kind of intervention for parents and the child together so that the learning loss can be minimized?
Yeah, so a couple things related to how we're thinking about reentering of our kids and how we, first of all, there is a lot of kids who, I mean, everyone, we've shortened the standards, you know, there's different learning that happens. So we just have to meet kids where they are as they come back to us. But two things. One is Title I dollars can be used for parent engagement and therefore parent training. So some dollars can be used out of those Title I budgets. But what we're doing is we're thinking about how do we use some of the federal dollars that are coming to us to do summer school, and then how do schools combine that with their title dollars to have more access to summer school. So we are thinking about where do we do in-person summer school this summer. And again, because we can bring kids back in smaller cohorts, very likely we will be following the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance through summer. But we are thinking deeply about that. And I'll just shoot your idea to our Title I office to see how they're thinking about the parent education, which has been some of the work we've tried to do along the way.
Superintendent Perry, will that reflect in the next budget, this coming up budget, and what percentage increase could we start thinking in terms of to take care? We have close to 72% of our students, I believe, meet the Title I. Is that correct?
Yeah, so first of all, yes, we have about 70% of our kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch. That's not an exact correlation to the Title I formula for how we get our dollars. It's based on a couple other things. But what we've seen in the past years is flat funding of the title budgets out of the federal government. And in some cases, those have been decreased from the federal Title I or the federal title budgets. So while we know it's important, we also don't see that level of importance that comes generally through our title dollars. And as expenses rise, the dollar you got 5 years ago doesn't spend in the same way the dollar you're getting now, and we're still getting the same dollar. So while I would love to say it would be reflected, it can only be reflected in the budget based on what I understand the allocation is going to be from title. We won't see our title allocations generally until May or June anyway. So we sometimes start the next school year without knowing exactly what we'll get in our title budgets. For our general fund, we have to remember we're in a legislative year. The governor's budget that was released in December is not a full roll up of K-12 budget. It's below our current operation level, which is normal for December. That's why we're just going to wait till we can get the legislature in session. And you know, we then have to think about what the revenue forecasts and what all the competing demands are going to be on our state legislature related to kids learning loss, related to business recovery, related to mental health services. So yes, I want to say I will be able to come with an ad and think about recovery services in that. The reality may be that we'll be able to barely hold status quo in the upcoming budget cycle. But we are looking at about, I think, $33 million in federal relief. And we are taking, of course, we don't have a final number. We haven't gotten our allocation, and we're just doing back of the napkin math. But we are thinking we're going to initially prioritize about $4 million to put towards summer school so that we can have summer recovery programs in every school, even the schools that don't have Title I funds. And we also have to remember that if you spend $1 at a non-title school out of the general fund, you got to spend $1 at a title school. So there's all those supplanting issues that we have to work through as we think about that as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, Vice Chair Bethel, or I don't know who raised the hand, both hands went up. So we'll start with Vice Chair Bethel, then we'll go to Director Leopold.
So I wanted to go back. I apologize. I feel like I should know this, but I don't. For secondary education, when we go to hybrid, my daughters are on Tuesday, Thursday. So they're going to go back to in-person on Tuesday, Thursday. And then Monday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Friday, they're going to have at-home learning. And so is that at-home learning going to be self-led learning and somehow the teacher splits their time, or are they just going to be dedicated to their teacher learning on the days they're in person?
Ethan, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, at the secondary level, what they'll do is, of course, they'll go in person and do the in-person learning on Tuesday, Thursday for your kids. And then on the opposite day, they could engage in, they'll engage in a mix of asynchronous and synchronous learning. At the high school, we anticipate it mostly being asynchronous learning, so learning on their own and engaging with their coursework on their own. There could be opportunities for limited in person on those days as well. And they could also have opportunities to do like labs for those days too. So it really depends on what the restrictions are for the schedule. Now at the elementary, go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, I was going to say it's really identical to what a student is experiencing now, other than their synchronous day is in the building.
Okay, thank you. That's what
Okay.
Yeah.
Director Leopold, you have the question.
Hey, yeah, first, thank you, Danielle, for asking that question and for the answer. My little sister just moved in with me and will be attending North Salem High School here in the next week or so. So I'm trying to figure all that stuff out too. So I appreciate this questions being asked. The question I was going to ask earlier was, so this is the timeline that we have. Because we're getting vaccines, could vaccines change this timeline? Like, for example, if we're able to get a lot of our teachers vaccinated, and then of course, if the community is able to get vaccinated more as well, could this speed up the timeline? Or do you think that, or if we're not able to get vaccines as quick, could it slow down the timeline?
So the Ready Schools Safe Learner guidelines and the advisory metrics that are now 350 and above, if you're in the red zone, are still in effect, even if you get the vaccinations. And all the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance is still in effect, even if you get the vaccinations. So we've got to get the thing that speeds up the timeline is if we can get the county out of that red zone. That's what speeds up the timeline.
It really asks everybody, those who have kids, those who don't have kids, grandparents, grandmothers, uncles, aunts, everybody, take care, make sure to bring down the number. We need everybody's help. That's the bottom line. So once the county's number go down, that's what I'm understanding from what you're describing. I have
and we've got to get to herd immunity before the Ready School Safe Learners guidance goes away, is my projection.
There's a question I've been kind of struggling with. There are certain federal reporting requirement for, English language learners and others for academic part of it as part of civil rights data collection. Any of those federal reporting requirements are going to change because we are in this model, or we still have to keep reporting how many kids are in AP classes or SAT or mathematics, science, English learning, because those are required by the federal laws, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I do not believe we've had any relaxing of federal reporting requirements. We have seen the state relax as many as possible of the state level reporting requirements, which is what our state has control over. And so far, I do not believe we've seen much relaxing of those. What will be fascinating in the days to come is there a different system that comes out of the U.S. Office of Education and how they're thinking about that, and also how they will be ramped up in a way that may or may not make impact, right? So I think I just don't even know where those conversations are. I know we even have struggled in the past to get a waiver around our state testing requirements and things.
So because some of those reporting is tied with the dollars that we get, am I right in thinking like that?
No, the dollars come through a formula grant. They're given to states based on their poverty, English language learners. You know, there's a number of factors that go into that. So the dollars are given to the state, and then the state passes them on through a type of a formula grant to districts based on their demographics.
So it's not based on our reporting of how many kids are in ELL and how many are taking different classes. That's not the way they calculate.
Kind of. The federal government gives the state's dollars based on a number of different factors, including how many kids are in poverty, how many kids are English. So there's a complicated formula to get to the state. And then the state, depending on which title program, so like I think it's Title III, comes to us based on our numbers of English language learners. Title I comes to us in an amount based on our numbers of kids in poverty. So there's multiple ways it comes to us based on who our kids are, but it's through a state-run system.
Well, I'll probably be asking how this ties into accountability and outcomes and what will happen to our dollars if we are not able to maintain those outcomes for children who are getting that extra federal match. Perhaps not today. I think we have passed the time. And I just want to say thank you very much. This is a very interesting and very important meeting. We need to adjourn.
Yeah, can I add just one more?
Good night. Thank you. Be safe, be well, get vaccinated when you get